I would like to welcome everyone to Sustainable Ringwood the Sustainable Ringwood Green Team presentation on environmentally sound lawn and garden care. I would like to thank the Ringwood Public Library for hosting this event. As always, your assistance is greatly appreciated. Thank you so much.
Happy to help.
The Sustainable Ringwood Green Team activities are supported by a grant from Sustainable Jersey. So I'd like to acknowledge their support. And if anyone is interested in the activities of the Green Team, you can contact me, Jennifer Hsu, at the following email address, greenteam@ringwoodnj.net. And I've just put the address in the chat box so you can get it from there. We always welcome interest in our activities. And of course, we always welcome volunteers. So I encourage you to contact us. I'll be happy to put you on or email us and send you information about what we're doing throughout the year. As Mary Ellen mentioned, there will be a 15-minute question and answer period at the end of the presentation, and we would like everyone to type their questions into the chat box. You can type your questions as you go along, and we'll try and get to all of your questions. And so it is with great pleasure that I welcome Dr. William T. Hlubik. Dr. Hlubik is a professor and director of the RUTGERS Cooperative Extension of Middlesex County and the Middlesex County Earth Center. He's been doing a lot of presentations in this area, but I'm very excited about what he will be sharing with us tonight. So Dr. Hlubik, take it away.
Thank you very much. Can everyone see the slides okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. And hopefully they'll advance when I go to advance them. They're not advancing. Okay, let's see here. What do I need to do? Is there any tricks? Oh, there they are. Okay, can you see them now? They're advancing? Okay. So, yeah, just getting back, I appreciate the invitation to be here today to talk about environmentally sound lawn and landscape care and give you some tips on how to protect our water. There are some great things that we can do to really protect our landscapes, protect people within the landscape, and protect our waterways all at the same time. I just want to mention that there's two things you may be interested in, and I have some connections here for two programs that are up and coming at Rutgers University that are statewide programs. One is starting tomorrow night. We're doing a beginner farmer program, which is a statewide initiative through the United States Department of Ag for anyone that would like to start farming, expanding beyond a small garden into a small farm. I think we're pretty much filled up for this semester. So, but if you are interested, please log on and contact my coordinator, Brendan Pearsall, and he'll let you know more about that. We focus on mostly organic gardening and organic farming. Also, every Thursday evening, we have Are You Ready to Garden out of Rutgers University. And if you log on to this link that you see right here, njaes.rutgers.edu, Are You Ready to Garden? You can join us Thursday evenings at 6:30. You may want to sign up ahead of time so that we know that you're coming. We have a really fascinating speaker this Thursday talking about different root crops, and he's a special guest speaker from Wisconsin, University of Wisconsin. He's actually one of my former students from Rutgers, and he's working on his PhD now at the University of Wisconsin. But if you're interested in either one of those programs, I know Ringwood Library is going to be helping us promote that. So we appreciate that. Thank you so much. So let's talk about expectations in the actual garden area. We're going to get right into this. So when I talk about landscapes and farming, I say there's certain things that we have control over, like genetics and plant selection and placement of those plants and proper management, versus things that we don't have control over, like the weather, previous plants that people put in, whether they have invasive species growing, some disease and insects we don't have a lot of control over. But we're going to talk about things that we do have control over in the landscape, and we really want to reduce unnecessary inputs of fertilizers and pesticides to protect the waterways. And we really can do that. I've been in this business for a long time doing research, and I'm a part-time farmer and researcher, and I do work. I develop new strawberry plants. Got a new one coming out called RUTGERS Delight. You may see it in Indiana Berry. And I also work with many other types of plants. But genetics is very important. So selecting the right plant, we're going to talk about that today, can make a huge difference as to whether or not those plants are sustainable within your landscape system. And then adjusting some of the things that you do to manage them so that we can have healthy plants and a healthy environment all at the same time. And one place that you can turn to is always the New Jersey Ag Experiment Station, cooperative extension sites that are university-based information. I do run with my colleagues an organic land care program every year, and we're actually putting it online this year. So if you're interested in organic land care, there is the link for that. It's njaes.rutgers.edu/organic land care. And in there we train, it's mostly professionals, but we do have homeowners that join us as well. And we talk about organic options to control a lot of pest problems. So that takes place now because we're putting it online. You can take that course at any time of the year once we get it online. So my philosophy to all of my students, whether they be master gardeners or undergraduates or graduate students at the university, is first do no harm. You know, don't reach for a pesticide or just put fertilizer down because it's that time of the year. We want to first and look and see what the needs are of the particular plants, identify the problems and the plants that we're trying to treat, and use something that's less harmful to our beneficial insects, less harmful to our waterways, and I'm going to show you how to do that today. So our goal is to reduce pesticide and excess fertilizer use, reduce the risk of exposure to your children, to your pets, yourself, your employees. So, you know, I say, ask yourself, you know, what products would you use in your own landscape, knowing kids and pets will be playing there, and then be careful of what you use. There's typically an organic or a biological alternative. Here's my son when he was younger. He's now a grad student up at Rutgers, but when he was younger, he's out there playing with the dog. And there is a place for lawns, and I'm going to show you why lawns can be important, or I should say grasses can be very important in the landscape. If we over-fertilize areas, this is what can happen. And does anyone know what's going on here? It's called eutrophication. And that's when we have too much nitrogen and phosphorus, and we get algal blooms. And that can cause some real serious problems for our waterways. So we want to prevent this from happening in the first place. So we want to reduce unnecessary inputs of fertilizers into the landscape. So we can have runoff into streams and rivers and lakes from areas where we're using excess pesticides and fertilizers. And some of these materials can be washed off with the soil particles, and others can simply be washed off with the rain into these areas and increase contamination of those areas, which then can contaminate your streams, rivers, and your groundwater, wells, and drinking water. And as I was just informed, you're up in an area where you're supplying a lot of water for the rest of the state. So that's a good thing, and we want to make sure that you're protecting the waterways up there. Another thing that we have to be careful of is the excess amount of geese and deer that we have throughout the state of New Jersey. So we got to keep those populations at bay and make sure that we don't have excess fecal material going into lakes and streams. So the way that we can reduce the populations of these animals is to let grass grow higher around lakes and streams. So that, because when these animals don't necessarily see where their predators are coming from, they tend to be, population tends to decrease with these animals around lakes and streams. So, and we definitely want to avoid feeding these animals. If they're not getting enough natural feed, by attracting them into the area, we can cause excess contamination of lakes and streams. Also, in some areas, we have to put up fences and other deterrents that we use to keep geese from being residential versus migratory. We also have deer populations that are extremely high in New Jersey. The typical 1 square mile is about 10 to 15 deer per square mile is what we can handle environmentally in New Jersey. And in some areas of the state, we have 120 to 150 deer per square mile. So that causes a lot of problems with our plant materials, with understory plants in the environment. So we do need to control the deer populations as well as geese populations within our state. So that's very important that we realize that. And I talk about holistic systems where, growing different types of plants to attract pollinators is very important. In some areas, we don't necessarily even have to have lawns. We can have areas with native plants. And if we don't need to mow those areas, we can bring native plants in, establish them. We do have to periodically mow so that we don't have invasive species coming in. But wherever we can get pollinators coming in and a lot of native plants established in our park systems and in open areas, that's really a good thing, because then we've got a more holistic system. It's really supporting all of our pollinators throughout the area and supporting our food crops as well. So if we just look at some of the microbiome and the interaction between beneficial microbes in the soil, including mycorrhizae and different types of organisms, we see that it's very important not to overuse fertilizers or pesticides, because if we overuse fertilizers, we can really change the balance of the beneficial microbes, especially if we're using acidifying fertilizers. And if we're overusing certain types of pesticides that can also impact honeybees, then we can have a detrimental effect on the honeybees. So that's why many of our farmers are working with us together at Rutgers Cooperative Extension and the New Jersey Ag Experiment Station to use integrated pest management. So integrated pest management means that the growers are using things at specific times of the day, using low input materials and following threshold levels so that we can reduce negative impact on pollinators. So if you want to know where plants thrive the best, we kind of look at what nature teaches us. And nature teaches us that plants are adapted to specific conditions of soil, light, and temperature, and specific types of microbes. So we don't want to set that balance off so that we can have the slow recycling of nutrients and microorganisms back into the environment. Because if we add too much fertilizer, think about this: when you go out to the wild areas and the forested areas, no one's out there fertilizing those plants. They're recycling those nutrients naturally from the leaves. And because of that, as a plant pathologist and a geneticist, I can tell you that that's really the best way for plants to get their nutrients, to recycle them slowly back to the plants. Because if we cause excessive growth, plants of all types within our landscape can be more susceptible to disease and insect problems. And then in turn, we increase the cycling or the need for more pesticides. So we need to know how to bring everything back into balance, just as nature does. So one of the things we can do is introduce native and pest-resistant plants to reduce overall pesticide use. And by introducing native plants, we have many lists of different natives that you can use in the state. And there are nurseries throughout the state of New Jersey that will offer native plants. So if you look on that line for native plants from local nurseries, there will be listings all throughout the state. And because I represent the university, I don't promote one group or another. I would just say look for native plants that are adapted to our areas. If you're going to use pest-resistant but non-natives, make sure those plants are adapted to our conditions in the area. Make sure those trees and shrubs and even the grass varieties are adapted to our environment. And there are some pretty tough plants out there. If you go up Mount Washington right before you hit all stone, you'll see that there are different types of grasses that can survive even in that environment where winds can get over 200 miles per hour. and you have pretty cold conditions and pretty crazy conditions. So grasses are actually a original or a progenitor species that will go in and stabilize soils that are forming and kind of tie together those soils to prevent erosions. So grasses can actually be a very good thing. And on many of our lands throughout the world, we have grasses being established as part of the native landscape. So we keep plants healthy by making sure that we provide or we keep microorganisms happy. We provide the right amount of slow recycling fertility. We're going to talk about how to do that, the right amount of moisture, the right amount of light for that particular plant. And we have to have oxygen to the root systems. If we don't get good oxygen to our trees and our shrubs and our turf grass, they're not going to do very well in that environment. So we've got to increase drainage if we can't get oxygen to the root systems. There are beneficial fungi that we work with at the university. One is called Endophytes, and we've been able to reestablish at Rutgers University many of these endophytes back into different types of grasses, and they actually protect grasses. So if you're going to grow different types of grasses in your area, make sure they contain endophytes. And you can look online to see whether or not the grasses that you're selecting contain endophytes, or it may say it right on the seed bag that this grass has a beneficial fungi that's protecting it from insects feeding on the grass. And you want to purchase that seed fresh if it contains endophytes, because after about 6 months, the endophytes start to, or after about a year, they start to dissipate. So store them in a cool, dry place. So endophytes can be found on certain varieties, certain types of grass that we select. So you want to buy the grass seed that says contains endophytes or contains beneficial fungi, or it may use a term like myco advantage as well. So these are terms that are helpful to you when you're going out to buy grass seed. And here you can see what's the problem with this particular landscape. Well, I usually ask that in my classes, but because we're dealing with online right now, I'm just going to say there's not a lot of diversity here. And also you can see that they're mowing way too low. You want to bring that mowing height up to about 3.5 to 4 inches. And there's no reason for us to mow any closer to the ground. As a matter of fact, all of these grass species will flourish and do much better when the grass is mowed higher. And then you want to recycle all those grass clippings right back to the lawn, because they provide anywhere from 30 to 50% nitrogen right back to the grass, but they also stimulate beneficial microbes to keep the grass healthy. And then we don't even have to apply fertilizers for those areas, especially if we're growing certain grasses I'm going to suggest today. You may need a little nitrogen to get started when you first seed your grass, but then after that, if you're growing a turf type tall fescues or fine fescues, you're going to be fine. But we want to avoid monoculture. You don't want to plant 3 or 5, of the same type of tree or shrub. And even with turf grasses, we want to plant different types of grasses or different varieties so that we can have genetic variability, so that one disease or insect doesn't come in and wipe out everything within your landscape. So avoid monoculture, use native plants whenever possible, and leave buffer zones too. If you're next to a river or a lake, try to leave if you can, a 30 or 50 foot buffer zone of where the grass is higher and it's cut even 4 to 5 inches or higher. And that way, what you'll do is you'll actually be decreasing the amount of geese infestation you have in that area. And also you'll be, by having that grass buffer, that will prevent excess nutrients and pesticides and soil from washing into those waterways. And then if you do cut a pathway down to the lake or stream, cut it at a diagonal so that geese can't see directly through, and then you'll have less geese problems in that area. And believe me, we have many years of research that shows that recycling grass clippings is the very best thing to do. One of my colleagues, Dr. Joe Heckman, has done research extensively over the years and has proven that the recycling the grass clippings right back onto the lawn is the very best thing to do. So seeding, if we need to seed, we do that usually in late summer, early fall. Second best times to do it is in the spring, and that's because we have a lot of weed competition. But one way that you can get a great looking lawn is to use this overseeder that you see here, and many people can rent an overseeder or you can have your lawn care company do that for you. That's the only time that you would mow closer to the ground is when you're overseeding in the spring or in the fall. You would mow closer so you could do the overseeding. And then the overseeder actually has little knives that cut down so it allows the seed to fall down where it needs to go. And it actually has a little indicator that shows you what rate to plant different types of grasses that you're buying. And then after you do that, you irrigate it in. If you can put a little compost or peat moss over top of that and irrigate that, you're going to have a good seeding. And that's how we increase the density of grasses and decrease the amount of weed problems that we have. Another thing we can do is lay sod. Usually that's a little bit much for many people to do that, so they'll have somebody come in and do that. But if you want an instant grassy area, sod is really the way to go because we can do that throughout a good portion of the year, not in the wintertime, but typically the spring and in the fall, and even in some of the summer, we can get away with that as long as we adequately water those areas. So most of the grasses that are adapted to our area, we want to look for cool season grasses that can tolerate the warm temperatures as well as the cooler winter temperatures in our area. And some of the best grasses that I'm going to point out here for low input that require less nitrogen, especially if you're living around a lake or a stream, you want to go with fine fescues, because if you look here, many fine fescues and tall fescues require as little as 0 pounds per nitrogen if you're recycling grass clippings. So 0 to 2 pounds per 1,000 square foot with the fine fescues and tall fescues. So look for varieties of tall fescue and fine fescue and avoid the perennial ryegrasses and Kentucky bluegrass around areas where we have lakes and streams. Because of the Kentucky blue and the perennial ryegrass tend to require more fertilizer, and we want to cut back on our use of fertilizer. And as we become more aware of what the environment and having less of a negative impact on the environment, then we want to make sure we're using less fertilizers, because the energy that goes into making fertilizer with the Haber-Bosch process is one where it's a very high energy intensive process. So anytime we can reduce the amount of fertilizer, that's a good thing for the environment, a good thing for humanity. Cool season grasses tend to slow down a little bit in the middle of the summer. So that's why we make sure that we don't add fertilizers and pesticides when it's too hot and the plants are growing slowly, because the plants are really only taking up those fertilizers in the spring and in the fall. So this just shows you the rate of uptake and growth of the root system and the tops of most of our cool season grasses in our area. So the grasses that we want to focus on for our state are really the fine fescues, which include hard fescues, creeping, red fescues, and the tall fescues, the turf type tall fescues. These are the best for areas where you've got lakes and streams, because they have a much deeper root system. So the deep root system can harvest nitrogen, can harvest water much deeper into the soil, and will provide that stability, and we can get away. And if we use an endophytic fine fescue or tall fescue, we also have protection naturally from many pesticides, so we can cut out our use of insecticides. So you can see just by the proper selection of certain types of grasses, we can really reduce any kind of negative impact on our environment. Here's a place you can go to find out some of the best turf grass varieties. RUTGERS and Cornell and Penn State and all of our friends at all of the experiment stations go to this and put information on this site, www.ntep.org. And here you can select varieties that have performed best in the Northeast. And then you can look that up when you're at the store and see if any of the varieties you see in the store or online are on this list, and whether or not they have the resistance that we're looking for. And we'll give you color of the grass, density at different times of the year, spring and summer density. Does the grass green up earlier in the spring? Does it stay green later in the season? It'll also provide pest resistance information. So this is a great website, www.ntep.org, to get the latest in research-based information from all of our colleagues across the Northeast. So as an experiment at our Earth Center, we looked at, okay, what does well in the partial shade? And no surprise, we saw that the fine fescues were doing great, like celestial and creeping, Celestial Strong Creeping Red Fescue and Cindy Lou Strong Creeping Red Fescue. But there are many other varieties. When you look on that site, it'll literally give you hundreds of varieties that do well. Nordic, Oxford, Stonehenge, and Jasper, these all did extremely well at our site, but there are many other varieties as well that you can turn to if you have part shade. And low maintenance for full sun. There was one Kentucky bluegrass that we had good luck with, which was Zinfandel, but there are other varieties of Kentucky blue, such as Princeton P105, and many of the tall fescues that have endophytes in them do extremely well under full sun, like the Rembrandt, the Falcon Series, Constitution, 5-Point, and Titanium. So you can see that the selection of the right grasses is very important to help you maintain a healthy grass under those conditions. And then we can separate out our landscape into different zones, so that way we can manage them a little bit different. There's high traffic areas where we may not even be able to grow grass, so we can put some mulch down in those areas. High visibility areas, we may want to manage a little bit more, but where we have low maintenance areas where people really aren't, looking at it directly or not using that area, you can even let the grass grow higher, especially along streams and lakes, and you want it to, because then you're preventing erosion, you're preventing many of these problems that we talked about earlier. And then areas where you have play areas, you may want to use a grass that you can overseed constantly because of the need for overseeding in areas where you've got a lot of wear. So site considerations, wherever we're going to grow grasses in general, we look to have mostly full sun if possible, and we want to avoid densely shaded areas for any type of turf grass, because turf grass tends to struggle in areas where we have dense shade. So then you can plant ground covers and you can use mulch around trees and shrubs. Use organic mulches, not stone mulches. Organic mulches will break down, they will add valuable organic materials and nutrition, and will stimulate beneficial microbes within the soil. And just a couple inches of mulch, you don't want to create mulch volcanoes, but just 2 inches is enough. And that will help to protect the root systems on trees and shrubs. Also, for plants like rhododendrons and azaleas and dogwoods and all those ericaceous type plants, we want to provide 15 to 30% shade. So don't put those plants out right in the full sun or they will suffer. And then we will have more disease and insect problems. And also you want to look at areas where you've got intense slopes. If you've got some sloped areas, then use a fine fescue that grows to a certain height and then stops growing, so you don't even have to mow it. Or you can just use other types of ground covers that are adapted to those areas. So how do we reduce areas devoted to lawns? Well, for areas where we have kids and play areas, we may want those areas to stay in lawns, but just plant the better types of grasses. As I suggested, the fine fescues or the turf type tall fescues. We can also, by using those selections, we can have low maintenance lawns that require less fertilizer, less water, less pesticides if they contain endophytes. And we want to make sure that we're not competing, turf grass isn't competing with our trees and shrubs. The trees and shrubs add many valuable attributes to the landscape, especially shade. If you have shade trees on the south, southeast, southwest corner of your house, they can save your air conditioning and electric bills by anywhere from 30 to 40% or more if those plants are properly placed. So please protect your trees and shrubs first and foremost. Don't worry as much about the lawn. You can select varieties that will adapt to the conditions of lawn or the conditions you have within your landscape. So create a balance, work with what you have. If you have an area that has quite a bit of shade, then select plants that are adapted to the shade. Don't try to grow turf grass where you've got excessive shade. Select plants that will grow in those areas that are adapted to your pH conditions. So you want to make sure you take a soil test. I'll show you how to do that momentarily. I got to look at my time here because professors can keep talking for hours and hours, and if they don't look at the time. So here you see that this was a friend of mine who actually, they were getting ready to tear down this barn and this house, and he totally rebuilt it, redid the landscape. It's a beautiful little house, and he's got the plants just flourishing because he adjusted the soils and planted plants that were adapted to those conditions, and they're doing extremely well. Here you can see as you get into shadier areas that plants like hostas and liriope and other types of plants will do better, where you've got 15 to 30% shade, and you'll see that the turf grasses start to disappear, and that's fine because these other plants will take over. And here we've used just a couple inches of mulch, not too much, but you don't want to use more than 2 inches of mulch. That'll keep those plants at the right temperature, the root system, and it'll keep weeds down. It'll recycle nutrients. It will increase the beneficial microbes within those soils by using these type of wood mulches properly within the landscape. And we're using the shade to shade that house. And you can see that patio that this person has coming off of there, he saves a lot in energy costs by having those beautiful trees, the oaks and maples around that area. And he saves in air conditioning. And then because they're trees that lose their leaves, deciduous trees, in the wintertime, the sun comes in and heats up that area and acts as a heat sink. So that's what you want to do on the south, southeast, southwest corner of your house. And that will help you to have shade in the summer and then the full sun coming in and heating up the area during the wintertime so that you can get benefits. Plus, this person actually has a wood burning stove there, so he can actually use that to heat his house during the winter. And the reason I know is because my brother's house, this was our first house we had when we started out farming, and he totally rebuilt that house. So I know everything that's in that house. Okay, so proper cultural management for anything on our landscape, make sure that we're planting at the right time of the year. For turf grasses and for overseeding, that's going to be the fall. And then your second best time is going to be in the spring. And that's because you're competing with more weeds germinating. Water sparingly and deeply. Whether it's the lawn or your trees and shrubs, water 1 to 1.5 inches of water. If you're getting natural irrigation, then please don't put any more water down, because you just end up, if you're watering excessively, you're wasting water, number one. Number two, you can increase diseases. On our disease models that we develop at the university, when people overwater, they increase diseases. So water early in the morning, water deeply, and if you don't have to water, don't water. Fertilization should be minimized, as we talked about earlier, by planting the right types of plants. When you can use mulches around plants, that's going to decrease your need for fertilizers. You're going to be recycling nutrients naturally. We're going to talk about pruning and mowing and renovation in just a moment. Compaction is a real problem in many of our soils, especially up in your neck of the woods. My goodness, you got some compaction issues up there, don't you? Just nod your heads if you, because I know those soils are pretty heavy. So periodically you need to decompact those soils by doing core aeration so that you can get your plants to grow properly. And whenever you have compaction, you tend to get more weeds in those areas. So you have to solve the compaction problem. So reaching for a pesticide or an herbicide to control your weeds is not going to resolve the problem. It's like trying to put a little Band-Aid on a big wound. It's not going to fix the problem. And one thing you may have to do in certain areas is if you have too thick of thatch, as you see here, and the thatch is just this spongy area of mostly dead rhizomes, roots, and crown tissues. So you periodically have to dethatch your grass. You would do that in September is the best time to do it in your neck of the woods. And you would simply set those dethatching blades or have somebody come in and do it for you. So the blades go down through the thatch layer that you see here, and they kick up a little bit of soil. By doing that, you will also prevent runoff of excess water and excess nutrients too, because that thatch layer will actually prevent water and nutrients from penetrating down into the soil where it's needed. So if you're near a waterway, you want to protect that waterway by periodically dethatching when you need to. So if the thatch gets more than 1/2 inch in thickness in September, you want to go ahead and dethatch those areas. What causes excess thatch? Over fertilization. If your pH hasn't been adjusted and you haven't taken a soil test, you want your balance of your pH on most of our soils to be between about 6 to 6.5. The only time you want the pH or the soil acidity lower than that is if you're growing ericaceous plants like rhododendrons and azaleas and certain types of pines really like the lower pH. We want to irrigate. If we're going to irrigate early in the morning and do not over irrigate. Please reduce your excessive use of pesticide applications. Do not use a pesticide unless you absolutely have identified that you need it and that you've identified the disease or insect problem you're trying to control. And then make sure that the person is certified to use integrated pest management and that they're just not out and spraying. So that's important to understand. So the dethatching here, you can see here actually removes that thatch. We go in 2 different directions, and then we can rake that off and put it in our compost pile. I encourage everyone to start composting because then we're going to show you what to do with that wonderful compost. And core aeration is another thing that you can do on those heavy soils. You can rent one of these machines, or if you're unable to do this, you can have somebody come in and do core aeration. The best time to do dethatching and core aeration with lawns is going to be in September or late August. And what that does is it removes these plugs and allows expansion. And then you can top dress that with some of your good old compost, or you can use a little bit of peat moss in there as well. And then you can overseed after you've done that, after you've adjusted the pH. If the pH is too low, you add lime based on your soil test at RUTGERS. Or if the pH is too high, you may need to add sulfur. I doubt that your pH in North Jersey is going to be too high. I think in many cases it's probably going to be low, but you won't know until you have your soil tested. When it comes to watering, be careful not to overwater because if you water late in the day, many of your trees and shrubs and your vegetable plants can actually increase the amount of disease problems that we see. So you want to water or irrigate early in the morning. If you can irrigate at the base of your vegetable trees and shrubs, that's fine. But for lawns, you can't do that. So if you do need to irrigate early in the morning so you're conserving water and reducing disease problems that you may have. During a drought, to stay off of the area, the grasses will go into dormancy. The only thing I would recommend that you do water is around your trees and shrubs to protect them, but I would not water the lawn. Just stay off of the lawn. Do not irrigate it because it'll go into dormancy and then it will come back after regular rains will resume. Do not use fertilizers or herbicides with high temperatures or drought stressed conditions. I've sometimes seen these companies coming in spraying herbicides when we've got drought and heat conditions. That's the worst thing you can do unless you want to directly damage your trees and shrubs and lawns. So stay off of those areas during a drought and just focus your watering on your most valuable trees, not the lawn. Let's talk about mowing. Keep the blades sharp on your mowers. If you can, use an electric mower because these gas-powered mowers throw out a lot of carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide. Keep your lawn mowed at 3 to 3.5 inches, or if you can go to 4, that's great. What we have found in the research is by mowing higher, you'll see here in this diagram that if you mow the grass higher, your root system is much deeper, your grass is healthier. And that's because grass contains an intercalary meristem at the base. And if you mow the grass too low, the grass doesn't like it and it's not going to grow properly. I could never get my brother-in-law to do this. And he would ask me every year, what's the matter with my grass? I would tell him. He would go out there and he would mow it low. And he says, well, I'm not mowing it that high. And his grass always looked like hell. And it was because he was mowing it way too low. And then when I finally convinced him to mow it higher, the grass actually turned around and he realized that he was doing the wrong thing all along. So we've proven this in our research, and then you want to recycle those grass clippings right back onto your lawn, and the lawn will thank you for it. And those grass clippings do not contribute to thatch. If you are mowing every week, every 5 to 7 days, they break down, they add the nutrients that you need, and they stimulate beneficial microbes. You want to keep those mower blades sharp, whether it's a mulching blade or a regular blade. It's very easy to sharpen your own blades. If you need someone else to do it, you can do that as well. But you want to make sure you take the spark plug wire off, disconnect so that it doesn't start automatically, sharpen up those blades, and you can use the blades over and over again. Instead of buying new blades all the time, either take them to someone to sharpen them, or if you can learn how to do it by getting a specific type of grinder at Home Depot or Lowe's or one of those places, Ace Hardware, whatever. And you can sharpen up your own blades. That way you're not sending those to the landfill or sending those places where they don't belong. I like to see people get multiple uses out of things as an environmentalist. And this is what happens when you have dull blades on the mower, you'll get these offcuts that you see to the right, and you can have diseases moving in. But if you have a nice smooth cut, grass is going to heal over and you won't have diseases moving on the turf grass. It'll recover much faster. So just by sharpening your mower blades, you can reduce the amount of fungicides and in many cases eliminate fungicide use and insecticide use in most of our lawns. Pruning. Let's talk about pruning real quick on trees and shrubs. With some trees where you see this branch bark ridge and collar, you want to stay above that for your final cut. I recommend that if you have large trees and shrubs, you have a certified tree expert. That's a certified tree expert. Do those cuts, someone who's been trained by RUTGERS or other entities that knows how to properly cut trees. And it's a 3-cut system where they'll prune the branch out away from the base, part of the way, usually about 1/4 to 1/3 of the way up, do a second cut out, and then do the final cut next to or above the branch bark collar so that the tree heals over. And or the shrub, if you can do that with a shrub as well. Make sure that you're pruning a tree and shrub at the right time of the year. If you have early flowering shrubs, such as forsythia, you want to prune those right after they flower, and then they will produce blooms for the following year. So early flowering plants, you prune them right after they flower. And this is what happens if you cut a tree at the right angle above the branch bark ridge. You'll see that it starts to heal itself over, and then that will completely heal over so that no disease organisms can actually get into the tree or the shrub. If you actually, and you don't want to paint those black paints on top of that, because they actually will cause more fungi to invade the tree and cause problems. So unless it's a very light colored latex-based product, you would not want to use that on there. You don't really need to use anything. If you cut the tree at the right angle, cut the branch at the right angle, it will heal over just like you see here. And please don't put yourself out on a limb, call a tree company, because you can get in trouble real quickly if you don't know what you're doing. Like this guy, took a picture of him out there, and I did kind of warn him that's just not a good idea. But some people, you get up on a ladder, and if that limb was swung down, it takes the ladder right out from under him. So this is not something that you want to do, and I would get a tree company in when you have to prune something that high. So what we see in nature is just follow what nature teaches us. So there's a natural progression of different plants that will come in. These plants, this is actually an Acacia. I went up there with my family, in one of the most beautiful places. And I like to go to parks whenever I can, because that's one of my favorite things to do, is go to parks and go hiking and go biking and visit all these wonderful places we have in the US. But one of the things you'll see is that plants will survive fine. I don't need to add any fertilizer to these plants in the wild. They're doing fine by recycling their own nutrients back into that natural system. Now, when we do take a soil test, which is important in our landscape, we want to take a randomized soil test. So if we're calling an area our front lawn, or we're calling an area our ericaceous area where we've got rhodies and azaleas, that's a different area. If an area is our vegetable garden, that's a separate soil test. An area is our perennial flower garden, that's another test. But we randomize the samples. We go down 6 to 8 inches. We take a little bit of the organic matter off the top. Then we put about 10 to 15 of those cores from that area that we're calling the same area where soil is treated the same. So this would be area 1 front lawn. The back lawn may be area 2. The vegetable garden may be area 3. So those would each require a different subset of 12 to 15 samples. You put those samples together in a bucket, you mix them up, you let them dry out on a tarp out in the sun, then you put them in the bag to send them off to the lab. Because if you send it off to the RUTGERS Soils Lab, and just look up RUTGERS Soils Lab on the Google, and it will tell you exactly how to send the samples to our colleague, Stephanie Murphy, and she will take care of those soil samples for you, and you'll get sample results back in about 2 to 4 weeks. So then you can properly adjust your pH, and you'll know what nutrients you have within your soil. So soil testing is very important, so you know the pH or soil acidity, and that will help you. Here you see that most of the time we're looking for something that's between 6.2 to 6.5 is a good range for most of our plants, most of our vegetables, turf grass, most of our trees. Plants that are acid loving, like down in the 5 zone. So that would be rhododendrons and azaleas, and we want to adjust it accordingly to the plant's needs. And here you can see the different nutrients are available as the pH goes from 4 to 8 up to 9. The certain nutrients will either increase or decrease greatly depending on the pH of the soil. So that's why that 6 to 6.5 range is ideal for most of our plants. So soil amendments, we want a lime based only on a soil test or add sulfur based on a soil test. We can use the pelletized lime, which is easier to spread, maintain your pH between 6 to 6.7. That's perfect for most of our areas. Test your soil at about every 2 to 3 years. Apply fertilizer based only on your soil test. You can reduce your fertilizer use almost completely by recycling your grass clippings. Allow clovers to grow in your lawn. Yes, clovers are good. White clover is a very good thing. It will actually recycle nitrogen from the air because, as we know, over 70% of the air is nitrogen. So what clover does is it takes that nitrogen out of the air, shares it with the plants around it, meaning the grasses, and up through the 60s, believe it or not, and even in many landscapes in my area, they actually welcome clover, and most of our farms want clover mixes in with the grasses because clover can actually go way down deep in the soil. It can penetrate those hard compacted soils that you have in North Jersey, but it also adds valuable nitrogen back to the soil, and it attracts pollinators. So it's really one of the best things to have. So you can add 2 to 4 ounces of like a low dwarf clover into your lawn. Many of you probably already have clover. Just don't get rid of it. Don't try to spray it because it's actually a good thing to have on the lawn. So when you fertilize around trees and shrubs, people say fertilize to the drip line. So if you put too much fertilizer down for your lawn, realize you're also fertilizing the trees and shrubs, and you're increasing the growth, unnecessary growth of those trees and shrubs. So trees and shrubs can actually be more susceptible to disease problems that then will require more pesticides if we're adding too much fertilizer around trees and shrubs. So stay out beyond that root zone if you're periodically fertilizing your lawn. You don't want to add a lot of fertilizer to those trees and shrubs. Especially with your heavy soils up there, just make sure you're balancing the pH. You're using a mulch around the trees and shrubs, and you're good. You want to be caution with use of biosolids or soil-based products that say topsoil, and they don't have any other explanation on them. And if they smell unusual, they could have biosolids in them. So if you notice from these things just called topsoil, if you notice that they're dark black and they have a foul odor to them or an ammonia type odor, then I would stay away from them and I would not use them, especially where you have vegetable gardens. That's just my recommendation. So avoid topsoils with a strong ammonia odor. I'm not putting down that product or a specific product. I'm just telling you, be careful. So if you want natural soil and plant amendments, use compost that you've created in your backyard. You can use composted manures, but make sure that it says cattle or horse manure. Don't use anything that just says composted manures. It needs to say cattle or horse manure. Otherwise, you could be getting something that you do not want. They do harvest green sand from down in southern part of New Jersey, but it's very expensive, so most of it is shipped out to other states. Other products that are used organically include kelp meal, blood meal, bone meal, alfalfa pellets, soybean meal. So if you're looking to go organic, you can find these products that are also labeled OMRI, which stands for Organic Materials Research Institute. So if you want to go completely organic, the products you're using should have the OMRI at the base of the label. One thing you want to make sure you're doing, because I know our time is running short, so I'm going to try to finish up here. Recycle your grass clippings back onto the lawn because it can provide 30 to 50% boost in nitrogen. It's a great slow release source of nitrogen for your lawn. So please, for goodness sake, don't rake that up and do not throw it away. Use it in your, if you're going to rake it up, at least put it in your compost pile. What we have found in our research is that where we recycle grass clippings back onto the lawn greens up earlier in the spring and stays green longer in the fall. All of the research studies show that no matter how much nitrogen, external nitrogen they've added, it's always optimal to keep your grass clippings right back on. You'll see them, some people say they look unsightly, they disappear within a day. So as you get a little bit of rainfall, they're gonna wash right in. Here's an example of the microclovers that grow lower to the soil. So these microclovers, you can use about 2 ounces per 1,000 square foot. It will provide nutrients back to the lawn as well. So 2 to 8 inches of ounces per 1,000 square foot. Use the Dutch white clovers, not the other types of clovers, because they're more compatible with lawns. So you can actually go online and you can find Dutch white clovers that you can incorporate. And you will also find dwarf white clovers that will grow beneath the canopy of your lawn. So if you're mowing at 3.5 to 4 inches, a lot of times you won't even see these dwarf clovers in there. Compost. When you can, if you've got good quality homemade compost, you don't necessarily need a machine like this. You can use your spin spreader, but you might want to run the compost through a simple screen. And then you can use your rotary spreader just to put like 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch of compost right over your lawn, or you can spread it around your vegetable plants or work it into your soil once it's completely composted. We do have a seminar on that. If any of you are interested, I'll let you know about that, of how many different ways you can use compost and how you can do vermicomposting with worms right under your sink. So even if you don't have a whole lot of space, you can use worms. And I have a funny story about that I don't have time to tell you now, but I'm just going to let you know that my son did a project like that. The worms were delivered in the winter, and the worms got out of their little container and were all over the kitchen floor. So my wife wasn't too happy about that, but you just got to keep those worms contained and everybody will be happy. So this is what you can use for screening your compost. You can just take 4 2x4s, then have 1/4 to 1/2 inch openings in that, and you can put that right over your wheelbarrow, and you can screen your compost. Anything that's not broken down in your compost pile can then go back in to be further broken down. And then what falls through, you can use to top dress your lawns, put around your trees and shrubs, and put in your vegetable garden. So how do we reduce fertilizer use? We recycle grass clippings. We top dress lawns with compost. We use compost and mulches around trees and shrubs because this will actually conserve moisture, prevent weeds, and actually recycle valuable nutrients and increase beneficial microbes around those plants. Pest and disease problems. Normally we need 3 things to happen for disease and insects to become a problem. We need a susceptible host, conducive environment, and pathogens. So if we water at the proper time of the day, that means irrigate early in the morning, and we don't irrigate late in the day, we can reduce the conducive environment. By selecting plants that grow well in the conditions that we have under the proper pH, we won't have a susceptible host, and we will prevent the pathogen, therefore prevent disease problems. Biopesticides, some things we can use instead of reaching for a typical pesticides. We can use for grubs, we can use parasitic nematodes. We want to use those the first 2 weeks of August in New Jersey to get control of grubs. And this is a safe way because these parasitic nematodes specifically target the white grubs. They do not harm other beneficial microbes. And the best time to control them, as I said, is the first 2 weeks of August. We can use milky disease spore, but that's only active against Japanese beetle grubs. It doesn't work across all the different types of grubs that we may have in New Jersey. So let's just go over real quick cultural strategies for insects. So we're cutting out our pesticide use by maintaining sufficient soil moisture so that we have better control of insects. We avoid thatch buildup, so we periodically dethatch lawns so that we don't have a place for these insects to hide out over the winter. And then we also select grasses that have endophytes in the variety of grasses, and that will protect us from the majority of insects that feed on our grasses. So here's 3 quick strategies that you can use to reduce insect problems on your lawn. Reducing diseases in turf grass, very simple. We keep the mower blade sharp, mow every 5 to 7 days, mow the grass higher at 3.5 inches or 4 inches. irrigate early in the morning, control thatch, reduce compaction problems, and use resistant varieties that I recommended earlier, like the specific types of fescues, like the fine fescues and turf type tall fescues that are recommended for our area. And I think we're almost done here. Reducing weeds with sound cultural practices, encourage a dense, healthy turf grass. You see there's two areas here right in front of you on this slide. The area to the left, they didn't take a soil sample, they didn't dethatch, they didn't adjust the pH. The area to the right was mowed higher, it was adjusted properly, it was seeded over with overseeding done in September, and that's how you decrease your weed problem, by proper management. It's not always about just reaching for a pesticide. And they also recycled grass clippings on the one side as well. I'm going to stop there. If you have any questions that you want to read off to me from the questions that came in, I'd be happy to take a few questions. And you can also, if you're interested in our Are You Ready to Garden, we will send that link out. I guess I could go to our first slide here, if I don't make everybody dizzy. Oh, this one right here. This just gives you where you can turn to if you want to join us this Thursday evening, or if you want to be involved in our beginner farmer program somewhere down the road when we have more openings. Here are some links for you. Jennifer, do we have any questions?
Yes, we do. We do. And first of all, I want to thank you for just a wonderful presentation. I've just found it fascinating. I have some questions myself, but here's one question. Are you okay with neem oil used only as needed for insect infestation? That's NEEM.
Yes, yes. Neem oil, it comes from the tree as it's Azadirachtin is the compound. It comes from a tree Azadirachta indica from India. And that tree is, neem oil can be very effective, but use it based on the label. Make sure it's labeled for the plant you're using it for, and it's labeled for the pest. And if you use it properly, it can be very effective.
And then more to that question, questions. I also use nematodes specific for Japanese beetles / grubs. Are they
Yes.
safe or problematic for pollinators?
No, they are not. Nematodes are actually they're perfect to use. You would want to use those, as I mentioned in the talk, the first 2 weeks, even in third week of August, you would need to apply them. You will get them in a container that you have to keep refrigerated till you're ready to use them. And then you would water them into the lawn late in the evening so that they will swim down. They will actually penetrate inside of the grubs through the spiracles, and then they will release bacteria and give you biological control of your grubs. So they are a very effective way to control grubs. And I would recommend that you use them. And you have to use them at the right time of the year. Order them right before you're ready to use them. So they depending on the delivery time, you want to get them before, a week before you're ready to use them, and then get them and use them outside as soon as possible because they don't keep that long.
Another part, and I really agree with this, ticks are a big issue here. And I have to say, I think a lot of people are spraying indiscriminately thinking that they're controlling ticks on their lawns. But we use mulch borders. So first of all, can you address the issue of ticks and what can be done?
Ticks are another 2-hour discussion, but I can tell you that, yes, ticks are problematic. And we have multiple species of ticks, up to 4 different types of ticks in our area. The best thing that could be done is make sure you can use certain types of baits for that can be taken back to the nest of the white-footed mouse and other rodents that spread the ticks. That's one thing that you can use are the baits to help control them, and that will reduce any use of or reduce unnecessary use of pesticides. So look for the baits. The other thing is you can use a material to drag the edges of your property to see whether or not you even have ticks. And your dogs and cats, I'm sure, will bring back and show you where there are ticks as well. There are products that can be used, but you would want somebody with a pesticide license to properly use them at the right time of the year. Typically certain times in the fall, but you do need to be careful, and some of the baits are probably the safest thing that you can use. In other words, the mouse is attracted to the bait, takes it back, to their nest, and then they have less ticks migrating back and forth. But if you have a lot of deer in the area, it's very hard to break that cycle. So it can be a problem, but we have a whole lecture that's a 2-hour lecture where we talk about how to control ticks.
Great.
So,
Any thoughts about mulch borders?
mulch borders can be very good. The thing is that next to a waterway, you're best having a vigorous growing grass species, because mulches can wash away, whereas grasses that have a very good root system normally will hold up under rains. So on farms and in many areas, we actually recommend grass buffers. Like we said before, they can be, a little is better than none, more is better than not having any grass border. If you can have 10, 20, 30 feet grass border where you mow it higher and it's a buffer, and that will help also to control geese, but it'll actually prevent erosion problems in those areas too.
Now, somebody commented that they thought mill organite was processed sewage from Wisconsin.
Yes, milorganite is, and I would avoid it personally. So I tell my master gardeners, it's probably not a good idea to use biosolids anytime, if any time in the future you're going to have a vegetable garden, because they could contain some heavy metals. Usually it's a class 1 or class A sludge, so it tends to contain less of those materials. But if you ever plan to put in a vegetable garden, I would probably avoid using milorganite.
And somebody asked, is there any way to get rid of dandelions?
Well, dandelions, you can dig them out. If you don't want to use pesticides, they have a very deep taproot. So you can use devices that you can keep digging out the taproots. And that's really most of your organic pesticides will burn off the top, but they do not kill the deep taproot. So you have to keep weakening that. So if you want to use an organic OMRI approved, OMRI approved product, realize that it's going to just kill the tops. And then when it grows back, you got to kill it back again. You got to kill it back again. Even if it's an organic product, it's very difficult to control dandelions. Some people learn to live with them. As you continue to mow your grass higher and do dethatching and core aeration, you will see dandelions become less of a problem. Some people like to make dandelion wine out of dandelions, and you can actually eat them as well. The dandelions themselves, we grow them in the southern part of New Jersey as a food product, because the young dandelions are considered a delicacy, and so are the leaves when the plants are young. So you could consume them in the early stages. You wouldn't want to consume them later on. And you definitely don't want to consume them if somebody's been using 2,4-D and other products out there.
Right. I know that invasive species is also a big topic, but any thoughts on what you see as the major problems with invasive species?
We have a lot of invasive species. We actually, if you go on our Are You Ready to Garden, we did a couple presentations on invasives. We plan to do more in the future. We're also going to have some seminars outside, a walking tour, where we'll identify some common invasives we found in New Jersey, including myla minute-weed. Also, there are certain types of shrubs and trees that we find in some landscapes that are invasive that we don't recommend that people plant, like barberry. Russian olive is taking over parts of New Jersey. We have Japanese stilt grass is a real big problem throughout New Jersey. So we are working on methods of biological control. But if you join us at one of our open houses that we have, typically at the Earth Center, we have a big open house where 500 and 1,000 plus people come out. We show them our gardens, and that usually happens the second or third week of August. We have free food, sweet corn, all kinds of good stuff. But if you want to come out and visit our gardens at the Earth Center with your garden club or whatever, stay in touch with us at the Earth Center. And once you start joining us for some of our events, like the one coming up this Thursday, you'll become familiar with all of our teachers and program coordinators. But we'd love to have you out there. But yes, there's a lot of invasive species, so we need to show you how to identify them, how to get rid of them, because some will require multiple sessions of going out and digging these plants out. We are also experimenting with certain biological controls that we are using for mile-a-minute weed and for purple loosestrife, and those biological controls are actually very effective. And those biologicals do not attack any of our other native plants. They specifically target only the pest problems that we have. So we do a lot of research to make those things work.
So I think we only have time for just 2 more questions.
Okay, go ahead.
And that'll be it. So one question is regarding cornmeal weed suppressant products. I don't know.
Yeah, corn gluten meal, right. Corn gluten, the only problem with using corn gluten is it is effective if you apply it when the soil temperature is in the high 40s to low 50s. You'll start to see crabgrass and annual weed seeds start to germinate. So if you apply the corn gluten meal too late, it'll actually just stimulate everything to grow, including the weeds. But if you apply it early, and usually the time you apply corn gluten meal is when forsythias, you just start to see the yellow on forsythias. And the reason I say that instead of giving you a date is because that's what we call a phenological indicator. And a phenological indicator means when something is flowering, we've accumulated so many degree days and moisture and all these elements that then we can also calibrate insect emergence and disease emergence and weed emergence based on that phenological indicator. So a lot of our pre-emergent products that we use, whether they be organic or synthetic chemical products, we wait until we first start to see just a little bit of yellow on the forsythia before it even opens up. That's when we put down those materials. The problem though with the use of corn gluten meal is that by adding what they recommend on the label, we can actually have contamination to our waterways because it's way too much. It's more nitrogen than we need. So it's actually can cause an environmental problem, even though it's an organic product. So if we overuse it.
One final question.
Sure.
Some of us have fireplaces and we have ashes. And I was just wondering, are there problems in just putting your ashes on in your garden or on your lawn?
No, absolutely not. I would put them in my compost pile because they're, good potassium and some phosphorus in there, but they're great to put in your compost pile. You can put them around your plants. You're recycling carbon right back into your vegetable garden. So it's not going to be a problem. Just don't do a lot of it. If you've got a lot of ashes, put them in your compost pile, mix it in with your food waste and your leaves, and it's going to be a perfect ingredient. And all systems go. Get everybody composting up there, because composting is the most absolutely wonderful thing you can add to your plants. And also it reduces, you can add 1/3 of that to your grow mixes when you're potting up your plants. So you can cut back on your need for different grow mixes out there. You just got to make sure that the compost is completely finished. You can't recognize the original ingredients. And if you come out to one of our compost lectures, we have about 40 or 50 composters on display at our Earth Center. And we give a 2 to 3 hour class on composting, and we'll even give you a certificate when you're done. So just join us for one of those sessions in the future. We have a lot of great teachers. Our students, our Master Gardener students, and my undergraduates love to teach. So anytime you can come out and visit us at the Earth Center. And we're starting to open back up again where we can have 25 people at a time. And then hopefully by midsummer to late summer, we'll be able to have some of you guys down to visit us. I know you're pretty far up there, but we're off of exit, let's see, you can get off of exit 9 or exit 8A of the Turnpike, if that helps you to know where we're at. And we're about 10, 15 minutes from there.
Great.
But,
Thank you so much. This has just been marvelous. And
it was, I'm glad we had a chance to talk to everyone up in your neck of the woods, and we hope to see you in the near future and hope to participate with the Ringwood Library in the future. And so thank you very much for providing this opportunity, and hope to see some of you down visiting us at one point.
Definitely, definitely.
Take care, everybody. Have a great evening.